know and love treasures. You can't bend over to pick up a magnum condom for your massive dong without a treasure sliding out of your well-lubricated anus and landing right on the battlefield of your local game store. This is all quite a recent development because it hasn't always been like this. Back in my day, we used to cast spells uphill, both ways. It's been a wild 10 years since Kim McCarr arrived in Journey into Nyx, bringing gold tokens with him, something that would go on to be refined and become treasures in Ixalan just 3 years later. Did you know there's only 7 cards in the entirety of Ixalan block that actually made treasures? Well, you didn't know that because that's a lie. I made it up. There was actually 25 treasure producing cards in Ixalan. But since 2017, treasures have grown to become omnipresent, becoming an evergreen mechanic that appears in every set and its dog. It's utilized to add extra spice and extra value to your average removal spell or saga or whatever. Everything makes treasures now. In some ways, it's there simply to stop people from missing land drops or not fixing their mana correctly and getting to cast all their toys in Commander. Everything's got to be pretty easy. It's got to be lubricated and smooth. And look, I don't want to be an old man here, like an old curmudgeon, an old fart, let's say, shouting at clouds. Fuck you, cumulonimbus. But there's certainly a kernel of truth to the fact that treasures are a hand-holding mechanic, both temporary ramp allowing you to play your big shit early in Commander, but also helping you to ignore the solid mana bases you might need or the fixing you might need, as it does all of that for you. And even if we take that as a granted fact, that isn't a bad thing. The idea that this mechanic helps to make the game smoother and easier to play is not a bad thing. I do not subscribe to the Dark Souls train of thought where you have to get good, but if it's easier, it's worse. Although, if we're honest, the average EDH player does need to get a little bit more good, maybe about 10%, and that help Magic massively. But regardless of how you feel, they're fucking everywhere. It pays to be prepared, it pays to be disruptive, to dismantle the status quo, to look up at your opponent with 14 treasures in play and say, fuck you, Cloud. Honestly, what did clouds ever do for us, coming here and taking our jobs? So it's time to declare war on treasures. In this video, I'm going to give you a plethora of ways to fight back, to take the fight to the treasure users. We're going to make it difficult to play with treasures, and we're going to point a finger and say, fuck you and your collection of trinkets, you fuck. If you want to pick up any single product or sealed product, use the link in the description below to go to coolstuffinc.com and use the code KENOBI at checkout to get 5% off your order, and it helps to support the show. They have all the cards I'm talking about in this video in stock. And if you haven't already, perhaps follow me over on whatnot.com, where I give away boosters, I sell bits and bobs, magic memorabilia, signed cards, all that jazz. If you want £10 off your first purchase, which is if you buy a £10 card from me, you get it for free and just pay shipping, that's free real estate. And hit the link in the description below. I've got 2 streams every single month. The next one is the end of the first month of November. So probably after this video comes out, if we're lucky. Let's begin with a PSA, a public service announcement. We are not looking for things that are going to target a particular treasure to get the effect we want. Echoing Truth and Maelstrom Pulse both look to target a thing, in this case a treasure token, and then bounce or destroy all other things of the same name respectively. The problem we face is that if we target one treasure, the spell's not resolved yet and the opponent can sack that treasure and the spell no longer works. To upset at least a dozen judges watching this video, it makes the spell fizzle. However, we can get very cute with this. Look, in our war against the treasures and the evil treasures, we're going to play our own treasures, what I call good treasures. You have to fight fire with fire. You have to fight clouds with clouds. Gems and gold with gems and gold. If they're going to fight dirty, we'll fight dirty with dirty coins. Okay, I'm losing it. No war is won without the backing of the military-industrial treasure complex. Fill your coffers. We're going to war. And this means even though we're playing cards that might punish or hinder the use of treasures, we're still probably going to utilize treasures ourselves. In order to do this, we're going to look to break the symmetry. I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later in the video. But because we're playing our own treasures and our own treasure generators, we might have a couple lying around, a few spare. If we target our own treasure with a copy of Maelstrom Pulse, for example, suddenly we have an effect blowing up all cards with the same name, all treasures, that's ours and the opponent's, and with the owner of the target copy, and we're not going to sacrifice it. Next, we have effects that will blow up all treasures en masse and don't target. Firstly, we have the old-fashioned blow up all the shit spells. Not blow up all the shit spells, blow up all the shit, spells. Actually, a comma probably doesn't work there either. Legacy playable, Meltdown can be cast for just 1 red mana and blows up all artifacts that cost 0 or less. Usually that's just going to be tokens, clues, treasures, blood tokens, map tokens in the new Ixalan set, artifact lands, and the occasional mana crypt too. This is probably the cheapest way to make everyone start sacrificing their treasures. Paying it for just X equals 1 as well, so you're playing 2 mana for the spell, will blow up everyone's soul rings too, which is rather beautiful. But the real beauty of Meltdown is that it scales with the mana you put into it. If you draw Meltdown Meltdown on turn 8 or 9, you can dump like, 10 mana into it and blow up everything, including all the big artifacts that are on board too. Meltdown is great. But that's a really important point we need to cover when it comes to treasures. When dealing with these pesky jewels, goblets, antique necklaces, and hoards of gold, they can be sacrificed in response to the casting of a mass removal spell. The point is, if you are asking them to do this in your turn, they probably don't get the value out of the mana they were going to use in their turn. But this is important to note because certain spells have upside when they destroy things, and most of those spells won't see the treasures being destroyed. Fracturing Gust will not gain you 2 life for each artifact and enchantment you've destroyed if they are sacked before the spell resolves, and Bane of Progress gets counters and becomes thicker, but the token treasures won't be there because they'll be sacked before the creature enters the battlefield. But that said, at any point you're forcing someone to sack all their treasures, it's still a good thing. So these things aren't quite as good as the treasures as they are into other like mass enchantment or artifact strategies, but it's still a valid thing to use to get rid of treasures. Twitter user Zombway Manager showed me a new Capenna card I'd never seen before. 5 mana is pretty pricey, but Structural Assault has a very unique effect that I assume is aimed at hunting treasures in particular, because that set was full of them. It destroys all artifacts, then deals damage to each creature equal to the number of artifacts that were put into the graveyard up to this point this turn. So this will count the sacked treasures while this was on the stack. You can't get away from this seeing the treasure going to the bin this turn. In essence, in today's Magic the Gathering climate, this is 5 mana kill all creatures and artifacts the majority of the time because there's going to be so much damage. And that's kind of unique in a red spell at 5 mana. If we want to get super cute, if we put a Stuffy Doll there, or a Brash Taunt or a Boss Record, but a Stuffy Doll style effect, this now shoots one of your opponents in the face too. So we've kind of broke, not parity, not broke symmetry, but we've got added value, I guess. But it's not just all about green and red explosions. We can remove treasures in other ways en masse. A personal favourite of mine is turning them all into creatures with power and toughness equal to their CMC with cards like Titania's Song in green or March of the Machines in blue. All treasures become 0/0s and die due to having no mana value. I guess at this point we should talk about breaking the symmetry of cards because this is a good example of that. These two effects are what we call symmetrical. They affect all players, all board states in play equally, symmetrically. But the point of playing cards in your own deck is that you're often looking to abuse or shift that symmetry. For example, when you play a card that blows up all creatures, typically you're not going to have creatures in play. In the case of these cards in particular, what we can do is make our creatures get a passive buff. This can range from a simple glorious anthem style effect that gives our creatures +1/+1 to more fanciful versions of that. Tempered Steel, for example, or Master of Ethereum are better artifact payoffs from the treasures. Suddenly you have an army of pocket change and your opponent's just watching their bank balances fade into oblivion. But going back to that symmetry idea or breaking it, it's not just about simply giving your creatures indestructible then blowing up the world. There are other ways to do it that are less obvious than that. The obvious one to this is timing. As we talk about effects that kill treasures, you can always utilize your treasures then wrath the board and similar things like that, where you get value out of it before you dismantle the current game state. Seeds of Innocence, for example, is a 3 mana cheap and effective destroy all artifacts full stop effect. Not hitting enchantments being the downside here. But if you make use of your treasures prior to firing this off, you are at an advantage. Or you sandbag your Smothering Tithe till after you've cast this, perhaps floating mana from your existing treasures prior to setting off this bomb. It sounds kind of obvious, and some of you watching this might be thinking I'm teaching you to literally suck eggs. But you'd be surprised at how many people tell me that when you're playing stuff like this, you have to cut. If you're playing treasure hate, you have to cut treasures. I don't think that's true necessarily. You don't want to rely too heavily on treasure generation if you're going to be turning them off with some of the cards we're coming to, but you can play these effects after you've utilized your stuff, or destroy your own effects like this to open up your treasures later on. There's a lot of ways you can sort of control the board state because you're the one doing it. I mentioned not playing creatures and playing Wrath of God, but historically speaking, go wide white weird decks have played Wrath of God effects in their sideboards for the mirror, because when you go wide as a creature deck, destroy all creatures looks bad for you, but what you can do is you can sandbag the creatures. You can let your opponent overcommit and blow up the board because you're the one in control of when the bomb goes off. When you're the one wiping the arse, and it's also your arse, you get to decide when to stop shitting. Was that profound? Now, of course, when it comes to Leyline of Singularity, a popularly commented answer to treasures in my last video about Ramp, the card turns all treasures into legendaries. It actually means you can only have one in play at once, and if you play another one, it gets sacrificed as a state-based action. It's harder to time this one, as having it come down on turn 0 before the game starts, as using its Leyline ability that's inherent to the card, means that you don't get to do that. Either way, it's a cute way to hose both general token strategies as well as treasures. But this parity that you can break and you can work around applies to even less destructive options. Collector Oof, Null Rod, and Stony Silence all turn off all artifacts in play, or should I say they stop them from being activated. When you're regularly putting these into play as part of your game plan, perhaps something bordering on stacks or even light stacks, you may want to avoid playing too many artifacts in your deck. Some enchantment decks will even avoid playing Soul Ring if they're playing Stony Silence, because A, Soul Ring doesn't work when Stony Silence is in play, and you're often going to end up with it in play as part of your game plan, and B, you're then breaking the parity because you don't rely on artifacts whatsoever. Oh, and C, I guess enchantment decks, enchantress decks often play like 1 and 2 mana cards that are like double green or single green, and your Soul Ring can't cast them too. So there's like a lot of reasons not to play Soul Ring. Most people should play Soul Ring. Even when you think you shouldn't play Soul Ring, you probably should. But it's just an example of how you can again break the parity by building your deck in a way that doesn't rely on the stuff that this turns off as well. Even though I'm saying arguably you can still play treasures if you're turning them off at some point. But I've played a shit ton of decks that play both Collector Oof and Smothering Tithe, especially when you consider decks that might be able to, say, tutor for Oof. You get to choose when you're deploying the Oof, when you're going shooting for, when you're putting to play off a Green Sun Zenith, for example. You can assess the board state and decide whether that's a necessary answer right now, or if you're ahead with treasures you don't, you use your Green Sun to get something else. And alternatively, you can also pop your own lock pieces. It's good to have sack outlets in your deck when you are playing cards that will turn off things that you might also have in your deck. So in the case of Collector Oof being a creature, it makes it a very easy permanent both for your opponents to answer, arguably, but also for you to sacrifice. There are so many good creature sack outlets out there. Yashan is also worth an honorable mention here for shutting down the aforementioned sack outlets and just sacrifice effects in general, including treasures. What a wonderfully good pig. But of course, not all disruption is made symmetrical. Some of it only affects your opponents for some reason. Khan, the great creator in the infinite wisdom of Wizards of the Coast when they were for a little while sniffing glue, is part of the range of planeswalkers from War of the Spark that aim to make your opponent's life fucking miserable, whilst you still get to masturbate furiously in the corner. Khan shuts down other people's treasures and artifacts whilst you get to melt down your gold and turn it into dragons and throw it into people's faces. Yeah, Khan is wild when you think about it. Beyond that, we have a personal favourite of mine, which is Manglehorn, a unique and powerful Reclamation Sage variant. It doesn't hit enchantments, which is its downside, but its ETB is best used to blow up a Soul Ring or much more powerful artifact than a singular treasure. However, its second line of text means that treasures enter the battlefield tapped, slowing down a big treasure dump before turn. For example, Dockside fucking Extortionist, one of the most powerful commander cards ever printed, an absolutely insane and broken magic card, becomes arguably reasonably fair and balanced when the treasures enter the battlefield tapped. I've heard people even talk about this being a way to balance the card and make it a better card going forward. Beyond that, there are some cards that they don't print them like they used to. So not examples of modern day power creep and probably a little bit of bad design with Khan the Great Creator, but things that people just didn't really think about when they came into the game 20 plus years ago. The big culprit of this is Energy Flux, a card that asks players to pay 2 mana per artifact they control in their upkeep. And for each one that they don't do this for, you put it in the bin. Considering treasures only temporarily make 1 mana, there's very little chance people are going to be paying to keep them around. So in essence, every upkeep they're just going to be binning off any treasures they've made during the turn rotation. Katagi War's Wage is just Energy Flux, but slightly less oppressive and built in a different age, a different era. It can hold a sword and it can punch face, so it being a creature body is relevant. It's more easily to tutor and more easy to sack, like I mentioned earlier. But it's also an option when you're facing down a lot of treasures, because treasures aren't very good when they have to pay for themselves. Angrin Marauder gains you 5 life every time an artifact goes to the bin. And again, they're going to be sacking the treasures before this resolves, or just sitting on them whilst this is in play. But sometimes someone's going to get greedy and they're going to crack treasures and you're going to gain 10, 20, like 30 life. And the table's going to hate it and it's going to be glorious. Further to that, Kibo Uktabi Prince profits by going from cute monkey to swole monster as treasures hit the yard. Each one of your opponent's controlled treasures placing counters on him when they die. He gets big fast. Mazarek Kral Death Priest is a payoff for your own aristocrat's deck where you do sacrifice loops and make him very, very big, but it is also buffed by your opponent sacking their treasures as a bit of a extra spice here. He gets pretty fucking big. Culling Ritual is a solid card that is very good in Commander, especially as Commander games get more and more efficient and you're playing in the upper power levels. But again, people are going to sack their treasures before Culling Ritual resolves, so it forces the issue, but it won't be getting you the mana that you think it will because people won't leave the treasures to get destroyed. Twitter user Sarif1 suggested Viridian Revels, a card I forgot even existed. Every time an artifact dies, you draw a card. People really shouldn't be cracking treasures with this in play and giving you cards, but you know people will get greedy. People won't pay for Ristic Study and Smothering Tithe. So some people are going to just crack treasures and let you draw cards, and it's going to be very good for you. But beyond blowing them up or tapping them down or getting benefits from them going to the bin, there are the more painful ways to deal with a treasure player. A boogeyman of standard 20 years ago and currently banned in Pauper, Disciple of the Vault is the real deal. Disciple makes target opponent lose a life every time an artifact hits the graveyard, making the idea of sacrificing a lot of treasures quite painful. But much like Mazarek, you can also enact your own game plan and get triggers, turning your own treasures into mind bullets. It also does this wonderful thing where if one player is really far ahead and everyone else is cracking their treasures to get back into the game, you can point the damage at the player who's far ahead, allowing people to funnel damage through their treasures through your Disciple into the opponent you want to target. It turns treasure into mind bullets. Kinda. In a similar vein, let's talk about Sardian Avenger, as recommended by Twitter user Useless Knowledge. I got absolutely fucking bodied by this card at CubeCon in the Artifact Cube, where this thing was an absolute beast. It's a 2-mana goblin with both First Strike and Trample, and it's +X+0 when it attacks, where X is the number of artifacts all opponents control. This guy can be swinging for 20+ damage every time he goes to bat, and the Trample gives him the ability to get some of that damage through, and the First Strike means he can attack into quite large board states and just kill down a swath of blockers in spite of having a low end toughness. But that isn't enough, because this goblin's got a second line of text that's also real good. Each opponent takes 1 damage every time an artifact hits the yard from their battlefield. It's got Disciple, it's got an element like Disciple of the Vault, although you can't target it elsewhere if you want to. Both Disciple and Avenger are cards people can sacrifice tokens in response to them being cast again. Like I talked about earlier, they won't necessarily get a lot of damage if people have tokens in play and they sack them while they're on the stack and they haven't resolved yet. However, at 1 and 2 mana, they are quite easy to get into play quite early on, which will just stop people from sacking treasures altogether and play like a mini lock piece. Or when people decide to get greedy, it's going to hurt them a lot. And on top of all this, we've got Mayhem Devils, a example of perhaps power creep from modern times. A 3-mana 3/3 that says whenever a permanent is sacrificed, you may ping something for 1 damage. You may target a player or a creature to shoot them for 1 damage. Now, the wonderful thing about this, it's for all sacked permanents, not just treasures, so even a fetch land triggers a ping from this thing. But like Disciple, you can target it places. Hell, this one can target to creatures, meaning you can kill off utility dorks, or if player B sacks 6 treasures, you have 6 damage to shoot player C's commander with, so you can even get some political alliances on the go. Mayhem Devil is one hell of a silly magic card. And then there's also the idea of just stealing the treasures with Crafty Cut Purse, a card that was never as good as people first thought when it was spoiled. I think the card is just harder to make work because it costs 4 mana. Things like Opposition Agent and Hull Breacher since then have been 3 mana, and I think those sort of effects, Orcish Bowmaster being 2, means that 4 mana is obviously a bit too high for it to see good amounts of play. But that said, if you land this in response to a Dockside Extortionist trigger and get all their treasures, it will pay for itself. And it just sits around as a deterrent. Or if people have like Smothering Tithe in play or Pitiless Plunderer in play, you can get the treasure by playing into it. Have one of your creatures die to your own sack outlet, not paying for the Smothering Tithe. You get the treasures, and then you really feel like you're holding them at ransom like a true pirate. And that's my relatively comprehensive selection of powerful and interesting ways to fuck with treasures in Commander, to disrupt them, to turn them off, or just make it really painful for your opponent to actually utilize them. I've definitely missed some stuff. There's 1,000,001 cards that say destroy all artifacts in Magic now, but if I've missed one that's more interesting than that, more nuanced, has more application or use cases than that, let me know in the comment section below. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Remember, don't let those clouds get you down. They're just a bunch of bastards. That's my new sign off. I'm going to say it in every video, or at least this video and then not the next one because I'll forget. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Ta-ta for now.